I was sitting in my car in the parking lot of a coffee shop in Ville, Tennessee, staring at a photograph on my phone. It was a page torn from the Sunday crossword. 3 words circled in red ink. The handwriting was shaky. Arthritis will do that after 78 years. But the message was steady. I'd been waiting 3 years for that signal. My parents spent 10 years telling everyone I was unemployed. They mocked me at church suppers. They mocked me at cousin weddings. They mocked me at my own grandmother's birthday party. What they never knew was that I investigate people exactly like them for a living. And Grandma had just sent me the code. What happened at that Thanksgiving table 30 minutes later ended up in the Ville paper. But before I tell you that part, you need to understand how a family decides one of their own is worth nothing and what it costs them when they're wrong. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories. I'm Bethany, 34 years old. This is the story of how my family tried to erase me and how one crossword puzzle brought everything crashing down. If you've ever been the family member nobody believed in, the one they talked about behind closed doors, stay with me, drop a comment, and be sure to subscribe. Most mornings, I'm at my desk by 7. The office sits on the 3rd floor of the Knox County Government Building in Knoxville, Tennessee. Fluorescent lights, beige walls, a coffee maker that's been broken since April. Nothing glamorous. The nameplate on my cubicle reads Senior Investigator, Adult Protective Services. I've held that title for 6 years. Before that, I was a field caseworker for 10 years total, protecting elderly adults from financial exploitation, neglect, and abuse. My caseload averages 12 open files at any given time. In those 10 years, my unit recovered over $3 million stolen from elderly victims, pension funds drained by sons, savings accounts emptied by daughters-in-law, property deeds forged by nephews who thought Grandma wouldn't notice. 47 cases closed with my name on the lead. 47 families who got their money back, their dignity back, or at least the truth. I'm good at what I do. I can spot a forged power of attorney from 3 pages away. I can read a bank statement the way a mechanic reads an engine. I know what's supposed to be there and I know when something's been removed. The irony is that my own family had no idea. They didn't know my title, my caseload, or my track record. They knew one thing. Bethany left Ville after high school and never came back to do anything useful. That was enough for them. 47 families got their money back because of my team. My own grandmother was not one of them. Not yet. The crossword tradition started when I was 8. Every Sunday morning, Grandma Helen and I sat on the front porch of the farmhouse, the same porch my great-grandfather built in 1952, and worked through the puzzle from the Ville Daily Times. She'd let me hold the pencil. I'd fill in the easy ones. 3-let words, animal names, colors. She'd handle the rest. But she'd always explain the answer so I'd learn something. 7 across, she'd say. Tenacity means you don't quit even when the pencil breaks. Grandma taught 2nd grade for 40 years at Ville Elementary. She retired at 65 with a pension, a savings account she'd built 1 deposit at a time, and the farmhouse on 40 acres that had been in the foster family for 3 generations. She was methodical. She was patient. She paid every bill on the 1st of the month and kept her receipts in a shoebox under the kitchen sink, organized by year. When I was 16 and the rest of my family treated college like a foreign word, Grandma pulled me aside after Thanksgiving dinner. She pressed $500 into my hand, cash from her own savings, and said, "Don't tell your mother. She'll never understand, but I do." I applied to UT Knoxville the next week. 4 years later, I had a degree in social work. 2 years after that, a master's. Every graduation, Grandma sent me a crossword page from the paper with 1 word circled. Proud. That crossword tradition, the pencil, the porch, the patience. It wasn't just a habit. It was a language only the 2 of us spoke. My mother, Linda Foster, got pregnant with my brother Darren at 17. She was 3 weeks into her freshman year at community college when the test came back positive. She dropped out the same day. That was 1989. She spent the next 37 years raising 2 kids, running a household, working part-time at the church thrift shop, and watching other women do what she couldn't finish. I don't think she ever forgave the world for that. I know she never forgave me. Linda didn't hate me because she was cruel. She hated me because I had the thing she'd been robbed of, the chance to leave. And when I took that chance and didn't come back with a husband or a visible paycheck or a job she could brag about at the church potluck, the resentment calcified into something permanent. My father, Ray Foster, drove long-haul trucks for 23 years. Solid work, decent pay. Then 6 years ago, his back gave out. 2 herniated discs, surgery, a year of physical therapy that insurance only half covered. His trucking company folded. He filed for bankruptcy. Somewhere in the wreckage, he found online sports betting. And somewhere in the sports betting, he lost whatever savings he'd kept. Ree wasn't cruel by nature. He was cruel by debt. There's a difference, but the bruises feel the same. He went along with Linda's narrative about me because it was easier than explaining his own failures. If the family was busy laughing at Bethany, the unemployed daughter, nobody was asking Ray where his pension went. And then there was Darren, my older brother, 37, still living in Ville, still working at Henderson's Hardware on Route 9. Darren stayed. He stayed when I left. He stayed when Dad's company folded. He stayed when Mom moved back in with Grandma. In his mind, staying was loyalty. Leaving was betrayal. He wasn't wrong to feel that way. He was just wrong about what loyalty actually looks like. 2 years ago, I drove the 45 minutes from Knoxville to Ville for the church potluck at First Baptist. Grandma had asked me to come. She'd called during one of the narrow windows when Linda was at the grocery store, and her voice had that quiet urgency I'd learned to recognize in my work. "Come Sunday, sweetheart, I want to see your face." I brought a green bean casserole, Grandma's recipe, the one with the crispy onions on top. I walked into the fellowship hall carrying that dish like it was a peace offering. 30 people, folding tables, paper plates, the smell of fried chicken and sweet tea. Linda saw me before I saw her. She was standing by the dessert table with 2 women from her Bible study group, and she didn't lower her voice. Well, look who showed up. Bethany just sits in Knoxville doing Lord knows what. The women laughed. Not mean laughs, exactly. The kind of laughs people give when they don't know what else to do. Linda kept going. I told her she could at least volunteer at the thrift shop if she's got so much free time, but no, too good for that. Darren was leaning against the wall with a plate of brisket. He chimed in without looking up. At least she found time to come eat. That's the most productive thing she's done this year. Bigger laugh. I set the casserole on the table, sat down next to Grandma at the end of the row. She didn't say anything, just reached under the table and held my hand. Her grip was stronger than anyone in that room knew. I drove home that night and pulled over on Route 9, 15 minutes from Knoxville, sat in my car on the shoulder, just sat there, engine running, watching headlights pass. Then I drove the rest of the way home and went to bed. 18 months before the Thanksgiving that changed everything, the phone calls started to shift.
Grandma and I had a rhythm.
Every Wednesday evening, right after Jeopardy, she'd call from the kitchen phone. She liked to stand at the counter and talk while she wiped down the stove. Those calls used to run 40 minutes, sometimes an hour. We'd talk about her garden, my cases. In general terms, I could never share details. The crossword clue that stumped her that week. Then the calls got shorter. 20 minutes, 15, 10. Linda's here. I can't talk long. That phrase showed up in every call like a closed door. I started tracking the pattern. Grandma could only call when Linda went grocery shopping. Wednesdays, mid-morning, about 45 minutes. Outside that window, nothing. One Wednesday, she said something that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. "They changed my pill, dear. I'm not sure which ones I'm taking anymore." In my line of work, medication control is a red flag. When a caregiver rearranges an elderly person's medication without explanation, it usually means they're either neglecting the schedule or using it as leverage. I asked Grandma if I could come visit that weekend. She hesitated. I'd love that, sweetheart. But you'd better call first. I called Saturday morning. Linda answered, she's napping. She doesn't want visitors. I called again Sunday. Same answer. I asked Darren to check on her. His reply came back flat and rehearsed. She's fine, Bethany. Mom takes care of her every day. Just leave her alone. I hung up and sat at my kitchen table in Knoxville. I'd heard those exact phrases before in 47 case files. I just never expected to hear them about my own grandmother. The following Monday, I was back at my desk reviewing a case in Anderson County. An 83-year-old widow whose nephew had been cashing her Social Security checks for 2 years. Standard playbook, isolation, financial control, manufactured dependency. I built the evidence chain in 4 days. The district attorney filed charges on Friday. The widow sat across from me in my office and cried. Not sad tears, relief. You saved my life, she said. I told her that wasn't true. I told her she saved her own life by calling us. That's what I always say. It's what I believe. I drove home that evening and checked my phone. No calls from Grandma, no texts from Darren, no messages from Linda, though she never called anyway. Not unless she needed someone to blame for something. I sat on my couch with a bowl of cereal and thought about the widow in Anderson County. She had someone who noticed. She had a neighbor who called her hotline. She had me. My grandmother had none of those things because the people who should have been watching were the ones draining her accounts. I hadn't said it out loud yet, but I knew the professional part of my brain had been assembling the picture for months. Shortened calls, medication changes, access denied, isolation from outside contacts, every red flag in the APS training manual. The reason I'd never told my family what I did for a living was simple. In my line of work, the moment someone knows you're watching, the evidence disappears. I'd spent 6 years learning that rule. I just never expected to apply it to my own parents. And then 3 months later, Grandma's property tax bill showed up delinquent for the first time in 51 years. Property tax records are public. Anyone can look them up. You don't need a badge or a subpoena, just a name and a county. I typed Helen Foster, Blount County into the state database on a Tuesday afternoon during my lunch break. The result came back in seconds. Delinquent, 6 months overdue for $1,200 owed on the farmhouse and 40 acres that had been in my family since 1952. Grandma Helen paid that bill on the 1st of January every year like clockwork. She kept the receipts in a shoebox under the kitchen sink, filed by year, going back to 1974. 51 years of on-time payments, and now 6 months delinquent. I called Mrs. Calloway. Evelyn Calloway, 71, lived on the adjacent property. She and Grandma had been friends for 30 years. Bridge club, garden swaps, Sunday drives to the farmer's market. Mrs. Calloway was the kind of neighbor who noticed things. Something's not right, Bethany. She whispered into the phone like Linda might hear through the walls. Your mother doesn't let Helen out of the house anymore. I haven't seen her in the garden since spring. She used to wave to me every morning from the porch. Now the porch is empty. I asked about Ray. He comes by 3-4 times a week. New truck, new boots. But the gutters on your grandmother's house are hanging off the roof. New truck, new boots, delinquent property tax, gutters falling off. I wrote it all down in a notebook. Dates, observations, quotes. Not an official case file.
Not yet.
Just a concerned family member doing what I'd tell any concerned family member to do. Gather what you can, document what you see, report what you find. Mrs. Calloway became our bridge. Every Wednesday when Linda drove to the Kroger in Alcoa, 45 minutes, almost to the minute, Mrs. Calloway walked across the property line through the gap in the hedge and knocked on Grandma's back door. She'd bring a thermos of decaf and a copy of that week's crossword. Then she'd hand Grandma her phone. The first real conversation I had with Grandma in months lasted 11 minutes. Her voice was thinner than I remembered. She spoke quickly. Sentences stacked on top of each other, like she was trying to outrun a clock. Rehandles the money now. All of it. I don't see my own bank statements. Linda says it's simpler this way. She says I was making mistakes with the bills, but Bethany, I never made a mistake with a bill in my life. I asked about the property tax. She didn't know it was overdue. I asked about her arthritis medication, the methotrexate she'd taken every week for 6 years. They changed it. Linda said the doctor switched me to something cheaper, but nobody took me to the doctor. I asked about the pension checks. Ray picks them up from the mailbox.
He says he deposits them for me.
I haven't seen a deposit slip in 4 months. I wanted to tell her everything, that I recognized every pattern she was describing, that I had 47 case files that started exactly this way. But she wasn't ready to hear it framed like that. This was still her daughter. I can't accuse my own child, Bethany. I'd heard that sentence before, almost word for word in 80% of my cases. So I said what I always say.
You don't have to accuse anyone, Grandma.
You just have to let someone help. I drove down to Ville the following Saturday, parked in the driveway, knocked on the front door of the farmhouse where I grew up. Linda opened it 6 inches. What do you want? I kept my voice professional, neutral. I'd like to see Grandma. I'll sit with her on the porch for half an hour. She's tired. She doesn't want company. Behind Linda, the television was playing a game show. Loud, garish, the kind of programming Grandma had always hated. She watched PBS documentaries and Jeopardy! She did not watch daytime game shows at full volume. I'll wait on the porch until she's feeling better, I said. Linda's jaw tightened. Suit yourself. She closed the door. I sat on Grandma's porch chair, the wicker one where we used to do crosswords, and waited. The garden was dead, not dormant winter dead, neglected dead. The tomato cages were rusted and collapsed. The herb bed was all crabgrass. Grandma's garden had won the Blount County Fair ribbon 4 years running. Now it looked like nobody lived here. 2 hours later, Ray pulled up in a Ford F-15. Oh, 2 years old, chrome package, mud tires. He stepped out wearing a Carhartt jacket that still had the tags showing on the sleeve and Red Wing boots that hadn't seen a day of work. He looked at me like I was a solicitor. Go home, Bethany. Nobody asked you to come. I looked at his new jacket. I looked at the hanging gutters above my head. I looked at the garden my grandmother had tended for 40 years, now choked with weeds. Nice truck, Dad. He didn't answer. Went inside. I drove back to Knoxville. In my notebook, I wrote date, time, access denied, observations, new vehicle Ray, delinquent property maintenance, TV volume consistent with sensory control. That was the last time I knocked politely. Mrs. Calloway had a key that nobody else knew about. Not a house key, but a financial one. 10 years ago, when Grandma was still sharp as a tack and thinking ahead, she'd opened a secondary savings account at First Horizon Bank. A backup, she called it, for emergencies. She put Mrs. Calloway on the account as a co-signer. The idea was simple. If anything ever happened to Grandma's main accounts, there'd be a separate pot that only Grandma and her most trusted neighbor could access. The account held about $9,000, untouched for years. Mrs. Calloway went to the bank on a Monday morning. She asked the teller for a 6-month statement on the account. What came back made her hands shake. 3 withdrawals in the past 2 months, $500 each. All made at the ATM on Lamar Alexander Parkway, the same one Linda passed on her Wednesday grocery run. Linda had figured out the PIN. Mrs. Calloway drove straight to the Knoxville Starbucks, where I'd asked her to meet me. She slid the statement across the table. I looked at the dates, the amounts, the location. 3 withdrawals spaced exactly 2 weeks apart, each on a Wednesday, consistent with Linda's shopping schedule. I'd built cases on less than this. If she's gotten into this account, I said, the main account is worse. Mrs. Calloway nodded. Her eyes were wet. Helen saved that money for 30 years, Bethany. 30 years of birthday checks and Christmas bonuses from the school district. She used to joke that it was her running away fund. She paused. I don't think she's joking anymore. I folded the statement carefully and put it in my bag. First evidence, not the last. The next morning, I sat across from my supervisor, Tom Reeves, in his office at APS. Tom had 22 years in the department. He'd seen everything. Sons who sold their mother's house out from under her. Daughters who maxed out their father's credit cards while he sat in a wheelchair watching Wheel of Fortune. Nothing surprised him anymore. I said, I need to file a third-party report. The alleged victim is my grandmother. Tom leaned back. He didn't blink.
Conflict of interest. I know. I can't be led. I'm requesting that Janet Caldwell take the case. I'll provide initial intelligence and step back from the investigation. Janet Caldwell was the best investigator in our unit besides me. Meticulous, thorough, patient. She'd handle it right. Tom studied me for a long moment. How long have you known? A few weeks? Suspected? 18 months? He nodded slowly. Are you okay? I looked at the stack of case files on his desk. Case after case after case stacked on his desk. 200 reports I'd filed in my career, and each one had felt like pulling a splinter from someone else's skin. Clean, precise, professional distance. I filed 200 reports, Tom. This is the first one that made me feel sick. He pushed a form across the desk. Third-party report of suspected elder abuse or exploitation. I'd filled out hundreds of these. I knew every box, every checkbox, every legal phrase. But writing my grandmother's name in the victim field, Helen Marie Foster, 78, Ville, Blount County, felt like writing it on a headstone. I signed it. Tom countersigned. Janet Caldwell had a new case by lunchtime. Janet worked fast. With a third-party report and Mrs. Calloway's bank statement as initial evidence, she filed for financial records through the county court. The subpoena came back in 8 days. When the main account records arrived at our office in a sealed manila envelope, Janet called me into the conference room. She closed the door. It's worse than you thought. She laid the statements out on the table, 26 pages, one for each month of the past 2 years. The account had held $131,000 24 months ago. Grandma's life savings. 40 years of a public school teacher salary deposited carefully, spent sparingly. The numbers told a story I'd read before in dozens of other cases. Monthly withdrawals of $2,000 to Ray Foster labeled household expenses totaling $48,000 over 2 years. Separate charges for home repairs that never happened. $3,500 for a new water heater. The old one was still there. $4,500 for roof repair. The gutters were hanging off. $2,800 for electrical work. The porch light had been out since spring. Linda's name appeared on 6 checks to a medical billing company I'd never heard of. Janet had already looked it up. It didn't exist. Total missing, approximately $127,000. The power of attorney had been signed 2 years prior during Grandma's hospitalization for pneumonia. Linda had brought the papers to the hospital room. Just temporary, Mom. Until you're back on your feet, Grandma signed. She never got the papers back. And here was the detail that turned my professional detachment to something closer to fury. Grandma's arthritis prescription, methotrexate, $340 a month, had gone unpaid for 3 months. The pharmacy had cut her off. While Ray bought a new truck and Linda wrote checks to a company that didn't exist, my grandmother sat in her farmhouse, without the medication she needed to move her hands. Janet left me alone with the statements. I took them home that evening to my apartment in Knoxville, a 1-bedroom on the 3rd floor of a brick building near the university. I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee that went cold and read every line on every page. 26 pages, 26 months. Each page was a month of my grandmother's life draining away in increments. Page 8, $2,000 to Ray Foster. Page 9, $2,000 to Ray Foster. Page 12 for $1,500 for home repair that never happened. I've read hundreds of financial exploitation files. I know what patterns look like. But patterns don't prepare you for page 22. The last page of the statement, the final line, current balance, $3, 41.28. I read it twice. Then I set the paper down on the table flat next to my cold coffee. 40 years of chalk dust and lesson plans, $3, 41.28. That was what remained of my grandmother's entire working life. Every morning she'd stood in front of 22 second graders and taught them to read. Every afternoon she'd graded papers at the kitchen table while the casserole baked. Every month she deposited her check and watched the balance grow penny by penny, year by year. $131,000 built over 4 decades of patience and discipline reduced to a balance that wouldn't cover 3 months of her arthritis medication. I set the paper flat on the table, picked up my phone, and called Janet. How fast can we move? I sat there looking at 26 pages of my grandmother's life, disappearing line by line. If you've ever seen someone you love being taken advantage of by the very people who should protect them, you know that feeling, that cold, quiet understanding that you have to do something. If this story is hitting close to home, keep watching. The crossword puzzle hasn't arrived yet. Janet and I met with the assistant district attorney for Blount County the following week. His name was Paul Whitfield, mid-50s, former public defender turned prosecutor, the kind of man who'd seen enough elder abuse cases to skip the pleasantries. Janet presented the evidence, 26 months of bank statements, the fraudulent PA, Mrs. Calloway's testimony about the secondary account withdrawals, pharmacy records showing the unpaid meth prescription. Whitfield reviewed everything for 40 minutes without speaking. Then he looked up. You have enough for a financial exploitation charge under TCA June 17, 71. Possibly fraud, possibly theft over $10,000, which is a Class C felony. Janet nodded. What we need, she said, is access confirmation. The victim herself confirming she didn't authorize these withdrawals and ideally confirmation that she's being isolated. Whitfield looked at me. He knew I was family. He also knew I wasn't the lead investigator. Can your grandmother make a statement? If we can get to her, I said. My mother controls all access, changed the phone plan, blocks visitors. The only contact we've maintained is through a neighbor. He tapped the stack of bank statements. We can get a welfare check ordered. Have an officer do a knock and talk. They'll coach her before the officer arrives. I said she won't speak freely with Linda in the room. Whitfield was quiet for a moment. Then we need her to reach out voluntarily on her own terms. I thought about the crossword puzzle, about 3 words circled in red, about a code Grandma and I had set up 5 years ago. The afternoon, I first told her what elder financial exploitation looked like, because I wanted her to be ready if it ever happened to anyone she knew. She'd laughed. You think someone's going to steal from an old school teacher? I hadn't laughed back. I called the farmhouse the next evening. Linda picked up on the second ring. I kept my voice even. Hi, Mom. I'd like to talk to Grandma for a few minutes. She's watching her shows. I'll wait. Linda sighed. The long theatrical kind that takes more effort than just saying what you mean. Bethany, your grandmother is fine. She eats 3 meals a day. She watches her programs. She sleeps in her own bed. I moved back in 3 years ago to take care of her. What have you done? I didn't answer the question. I said, I'd like to hear from her directly, that she's doing well. You want to hear something? Fine. Here's what I hear every day from the women at church, from your cousins, from people who actually show up. Bethany just sits in Knoxville doing Lord knows what. The line went quiet for a second. Then Linda's voice dropped lower, sharper. You had every opportunity, Bethany. Scholarships, degrees, all that education. And what did you do with it? Nothing. At least Darren stayed. At least Darren shows up. I held the phone away from my ear, not because it hurt. I'd heard worse in intake interviews with actual criminals, but because I needed to remember this was a conversation, not an interrogation. Can I speak with Grandma, please? No. Click. I set my phone down. I opened my laptop and wrote the time, date, and a summary of the conversation in my personal log. Tennessee is a one-party consent state. The call had been recorded on my end, not because I'd planned to record it, because I record every call from that number. It's a habit I picked up from work, and habits are hard to break when they're the right ones. I tried Darren next. He had blocked me on social media 2 years earlier, right after the church potluck. So I sent an email. Subject line, Grandma. Darren, I'm worried about Grandma. Her property tax is 6 months overdue. She hasn't been to the doctor in 4 months. I can't reach her by phone. Can you please check on her? His reply came back the same evening. A few blunt lines. Bethany, I check on Grandma every week. She's fine. Mom handles everything. The taxes are being sorted out. Stop trying to stir up drama. I wrote back. Darren, the taxes aren't being sorted out. I pulled the county records and her bank account. He cut me off. 1 line. You don't get to care now. You abandoned us. I sat with that for a long time. My brother wasn't evil. He'd never stolen a dime from anyone. He went to work at Henderson's Hardware 6 days a week. Coached Little League on Saturdays, brought Grandma flowers on her birthday. In his mind, he was the loyal one, the one who stayed while I ran off to Knoxville to become nothing. He didn't know about the $127,000. He didn't know about the phantom invoices, the diverted pension checks, the unpaid medication. He only knew the story Linda had written. Bethany left. Bethany failed. Bethany doesn't get to have opinions about this family anymore. And because that story was simpler and more comfortable than the truth, he believed it. He wasn't protecting Linda and Ray. He was protecting the only version of reality that made his sacrifices feel worthwhile. I understood that. I'd seen it in case after case. The enabler who doesn't know they're enabling, the gatekeeper who thinks they're guarding the family when they're actually locking the victim inside. My brother was loyal to the wrong story. I couldn't fix that with an email. 2 weeks later, Mrs. Calloway called me at 9 in the evening. She never called that late. Bethany, Helen fell in the bathroom last Tuesday. She bruised her hip and her right hand. Linda didn't take her to the hospital. She said it was just a bruise. I closed my eyes. A fall in the bathroom. Bruised hip. Bruised hand. No medical attention. I'd written those exact words in a dozen neglect reports. How bad is the hand? She can barely hold a pen. I saw her through the kitchen window yesterday. She was trying to peel an orange, and she couldn't grip it. Mrs. Calloway paused. I could hear her breathing. The careful breath of a woman who is scared. There's something else. Last night, I was checking on my chickens around 8 o'clock. I could see your mother's silhouette on Helen's porch. She was sitting alone in the dark holding a picture frame. I couldn't see what it was from my side of the hedge, but she was crying hard. Maybe 5 minutes. Then she stood up, wiped her face, and went back inside. I knew which picture frame. Grandma had one photograph on the living room wall that had been there since I was a child. Linda's high school graduation portrait, 1989. Black cap, white tassel, a smile that believed the whole world was coming. Grandma had kept it on the wall for 37 years. The only daughter's graduation photo she'd ever hang. Linda saw that portrait every day, and every day it reminded her of the life she almost had. I felt something shift in my chest. Not forgiveness. I was years away from that, but recognition. My mother was a person who'd been broken by a choice that was made for her at 17. And she'd spent the rest of her life breaking everyone around her to even the score. We're running out of time, Mrs. Calloway. It arrived on a Wednesday, 3 weeks before Thanksgiving. Linda had left for Kroger at 9:15. Mrs. Calloway was through the hedge by 9:20. She found Grandma sitting at the kitchen table with a page torn from the Sunday crossword spread flat in front of her. The page was creased. Grandma had been hiding it under her mattress, waiting for the right moment. 3 words circled in red ballpoint. The ink pressed hard enough to dent the newsprint. Help.
Trapped. Call.
And one more word circled separately at the bottom of the page in a shakier hand. Thanksgiving. Mrs. Calloway photographed the page with her phone and texted the image to me. I was at my desk in Knoxville when it arrived. I opened it, zoomed in, and read the 4 words. My hands didn't shake. My pulse didn't spike. I'd trained for this. Not this exact moment, but this exact type of moment. The signal from a victim who's found the courage to ask. The coded message that bypasses the gatekeeper. In my professional life, I'd received these signals. A note passed to a visiting nurse. A letter slipped to a mail carrier. A phone call made in whispers while the abuser was in the shower. Each one was a small act of extraordinary bravery. This one was from my grandmother, 78 years old, bruised hand, arthritis so bad she could barely grip a pen. And she'd pressed that red ink hard enough to dent the paper. I stood up from my desk, walked to Janet's cubicle, and set my phone on her desk. Screen up. We have it, I said. She's asking for help, and she wants us there on Thanksgiving. Janet, Paul Whitfield, and I met in the ADA's office the same afternoon. Janet had the full case files spread across his desk. The bank statements, the fraudulent POA, Mrs. Calloway's affidavit about the secondary account withdrawals, pharmacy records confirming 3 months of unpaid methotrix, the documented denied visits, my call recordings, and now the coded crossword. A voluntary request for help from the victim herself. Whitfield reviewed the crossword photograph for a long time. She chose the day. Yes, I said. Thanksgiving. The entire family will be there. He looked at Janet. You're comfortable with a multi-object confrontation? Janet nodded. All 3 individuals associated with the financial exploitation will be present at the same address. It's efficient and it protects the victim from any individual retaliation after the fact. Whitfield signed the authorization for an APS emergency intervention. Janet would serve as the lead APS officer. A deputy from the Blount County Sheriff's Office. Deputy Sam Morris, a 15-year veteran, would accompany for safety and to serve any necessary legal papers. I would be there as family. Technically, I had no official role. I was a concerned granddaughter who happened to work in the same department. But we all knew why I needed to be in that room. Grandma had sent the signal to me, not to APS, not to the sheriff, to Bethany. The granddaughter she'd given $500 to 20 years ago, the one she taught crossword puzzles on a Sunday morning porch. The one she trusted to understand 4 words circled in red. I was going home for Thanksgiving. 3 weeks is a long time when someone you love is counting the days. I went to work each morning. I reviewed other cases, interviewed other victims, filed other reports. My colleagues in the Knoxville office didn't know about Grandma's case. Only Tom and Janet had the details. To everyone else, I was the same Bethany I'd always been. Quiet, thorough, first one in, last one out. At night, I'd sit at my kitchen table with the 26 pages of bank statements and go through them again. Not because I'd missed anything, because I needed to make sure. Every number had to be right, every date confirmed, every fraudulent charge documented. If this went to trial, and it would, the evidence had to be airtight. There was no room for a missed decimal or a transposed date. I thought about Linda on the porch with the graduation photo. I didn't hate my mother. I didn't even pity her. I just needed her to stop. Mrs. Calloway called every few days with updates. Grandma was eating. Grandma was sitting up. Grandma had put on her blue church dress, the one she saved for special occasions, and hung it on the outside of her closet door. She wants it ready. Mrs. Calloway said she knows you're coming. I asked about Linda. Same as always. Shopping on Wednesdays. Church on Sundays. Acts like nothing's wrong. That was the thing about financial exploitation. The perpetrators almost never think they're doing anything wrong. They tell themselves they're borrowing. They tell themselves the victim would want them to have it. They tell themselves the money was theirs all along. It's the most comfortable crime in America until someone pulls out the bank statements. 10 days before Thanksgiving, Mrs. Calloway forwarded me a group text from Darren. He'd created a family thread. Aunts, uncles, cousins, everyone except me. With a subject, Foster Thanksgiving at Grandma's. The message read, Hey everyone, Thanksgiving at Grandma Helen's this year, Thursday 11 a.m. I'm doing the turkey. Bring sides. Let's give Grandma a real family Thanksgiving she deserves. 22 people confirmed. Aunt Patricia, Uncle Glenn, 6 cousins, Darren's wife, Linda's friends from Bible study, and Pastor Johnson from First Baptist. The same man who'd laughed when Linda called me worthless at the church potluck. I read that guest list and smiled for the first time in weeks. I didn't need an invitation. I had something better. I spent the next 3 days preparing copies of the bank statements, 3 sets, because you always bring backups. The PA document with the hospital date highlighted. Janet's formal APS investigation summary. Mrs. Calloway's sworn affidavit, the crossword photograph printed on paper. I organized everything in a manila folder labeled with nothing but a case number. At work, I handled 2 more routine cases. Went to a training seminar on Thursday. Had lunch with a colleague on Friday. Normal week, normal life, except that every evening I'd come home, open the folder and review the contents one more time. Then I'd close it, set it on the counter, and cook dinner. On the Tuesday before Thanksgiving, I packed a small bag, drove to Ville, checked into the Comfort Inn on Lamar Alexander Parkway, the same road where Linda made her ATM withdrawals every other Wednesday. My room was on the 2nd floor. I laid the folder on the desk, set my alarm for 6, and did what I always do the night before a big case. I went to sleep. 14 dinners. That's what I counted every night before Thanksgiving. 14 meals where my grandmother sat at her own table in her own home, eating food bought with her own money. Money she couldn't touch anymore. If someone in your life is being silenced by the people closest to them, keep watching. Because silence has an expiration date. Thanksgiving morning, 6 a.m. I lay in the hotel bed and stared at the ceiling. Outside, Ville was quiet. The kind of quiet you only get in small towns on holidays when everyone's either sleeping in or already in the kitchen. I showered, dressed, and put on the gray blazer I'd packed. Not a holiday outfit, a work outfit. The same blazer I wore to court appearances, to victim interviews, to every professional moment that mattered in my career. Grandma would see it and understand immediately. Blazer meant business. I drove to the Main Street diner at 9. Eggs over easy, wheat toast, black coffee. I ate slowly, read the Ville paper, the crossword section out of habit. Thought about the 22 people who'd be sitting around Grandma's table in 3 hours eating turkey carved by my brother in a house where the gutters were falling off because the repair money went to online gambling. At 10:15, Janet pulled into the diner parking lot in her state-issued sedan. Deputy Morris arrived 5 minutes later in his cruiser. We sat in a corner booth. Janet had the case file in a leather portfolio. Deputy Morris had his badge and a calm demeanor that comes from 15 years of knocking on doors people don't want opened. Timeline: Janet said we arrive at 12:30. Family should be seated by then. I'll present the APS investigation notice. Deputy Morris provides security and serves the temporary protective order if needed. Bethany, your family. You're there for Helen. Deputy Morris looked at me. You sure about the timing? Thanksgiving dinner? I set my coffee down. My grandmother chose the day. I'm honoring her choice. At 12:15, we got in our cars, 3 vehicles on the road, Janet's sedan, Deputy Morris's cruiser, and my 10-year-old Honda Civic. We drove through Ville in a quiet procession. Past the elementary school, where Grandma taught for 40 years. Closed for the holiday. Flag still flying. Past First Baptist, where Pastor Johnson was probably already at the farmhouse saying grace over turkey bought with stolen pension money. Past Henderson's Hardware, where Darren worked 6 days a week and still believed his sister was the problem. The road to the farmhouse runs through 2 miles of farmland. Rolling hills, white fences, hay bales wrapped in plastic. Beautiful country. The kind of landscape that makes you think nothing bad could happen here. 6 vehicles were parked in Grandma's gravel driveway. Darren's pickup, Linda's sedan, Ray's new F-150, 3 more I didn't recognize. Cousins probably. Smoke rose from the kitchen chimney. Laughter drifted through the walls. The smell of roasted turkey and sage dressing hung in the cold November air. I parked on the road just past the mailbox. Janet pulled in behind me. Deputy Morris behind her. I stepped out of the car. The gravel crunched under my shoes. I looked at the porch, the wicker chair where Grandma and I used to sit with the crossword. I straightened my blazer, picked up the manila folder from the passenger seat. Janet flanked my left. Deputy Morris flanked my right. We walked up the porch, steps together. 3 pairs of shoes on old wood. I raised my hand and knocked. Not the polite knock I'd done 6 weeks ago when Linda shut the door in my face. A professional knock. 3 firm raps. The kind that says, this conversation is happening whether you're ready or not. Footsteps inside. The scrape of a chair. Someone laughed. Cut short by the sound of the knock. I heard Darren's voice. I'll get it. Probably Uncle Glenn running late. The door swung open. Darren stood there with a dish towel over his shoulder and a smile on his face. The easy smile of a man hosting Thanksgiving, doing his duty, being the good son. The smile lasted exactly as long as it took him to recognize me. Then it died. His eyes moved from my face to Janet's APS badge on her lanyard, then to Deputy Morris's uniform. Badge, gun belt, radio. The dish towel slipped off his shoulder and landed on the floor.
What?
Darren's voice cracked. What is this? I said, Hi, Darren. We need to come in. He didn't move. He stood in the doorway like a man who'd opened the wrong door in a dream. Like if he just stood still long enough, the scene would rearrange itself into something that made sense. Deputy Morris stepped forward. Calm, professional. Sir, we're here on official business. May we come inside? Darren stepped back. Automatic the way you step back when someone in uniform asks you to. We walked through the front hall, past the coat rack, past the family photos on the wall, past Linda's graduation portrait that Grandma had kept for 37 years. The dining room opened up ahead of us. A long oak table, white tablecloth, the good china, Grandma's wedding set, the one she only brought out for holidays, 22 people seated around it, turkey in the center, still steaming, cranberry sauce, sweet potato casserole, dinner rolls. And at the far end of the table, in the chair closest to the kitchen, sat my grandmother, Helen Marie Foster, 78 years old, blue church dress, hands folded in her lap. She looked at me. She looked at my gray blazer, and she smiled. The room went silent in the way rooms do when the unexpected walks in with a badge and a uniform. 22 forks stopped midair. Linda was standing at the head of the table, carving knife in one hand, serving fork in the other. She froze. Ree sat to her left, a glass of wine halfway to his lips. The glass stopped. Pastor Johnson sat across from Ray, napkin tucked into his collar. His face went from confused to concerned in about 2 seconds. Aunt Patricia, Uncle Glenn, 6 cousins, Darren's wife holding their toddler on her lap, 2 women from Bible study, all of them staring at me, at Janet, at the deputy in the uniform. Linda found her voice first. Bethany, what are you? Who are these people? Janet stepped forward. She opened her portfolio and removed a document, the formal APS investigation notice. My name is Janet Caldwell, Adult Protective Services. We have an active investigation into the financial exploitation of Helen Marie Foster. She set the document on the table next to the cranberry sauce. Over the past 24 months, approximately $127,000 has been withdrawn from Mrs. Foster's bank accounts. The withdrawals are traced to Raymond Foster and Linda Foster. The words landed on that table like stones dropped into still water. You could see the ripples. Aunt Patricia's hand going to her mouth. Uncle Glenn leaning back in his chair. The cousins exchanging glances. Linda sat down the carving knife, slowly. This is Thanksgiving, she said. Her voice was shaking. This is my mother's Thanksgiving dinner. You can't come in here. And Deputy Morris said, Ma'am, please have a seat. Janet laid the bank statements on the table, all 26 pages. She placed them carefully, fanning them out between the turkey platter and the dinner rolls, each page facing the family so they could read the numbers themselves. These are Mrs. Foster's bank statements from First Horizon Bank obtained through a court-authorized subpoena. Janet said they document systematic withdrawals totaling $127,000, monthly transfers of $2,000 to Raymond Foster, labeled as household expenses, charges to a medical billing company that does not exist, payment for home repairs. She gestured toward the window, where the broken gutter was visible from the dining room that were never performed. Ray set his wine glass down. His hand was shaking so badly that the wine sloshed over the rim, leaving a red stain on Grandma's white tablecloth. Helen gave us that money, he said. His voice was too loud, too fast. She wanted to help. She said, Mr. Foster. Janet interrupted. Mrs. Foster's arthritis medication has been unpaid for 3 months. Her pharmacy discontinued the prescription. Her property taxes are 6 months delinquent. The power of attorney was signed during a hospitalization for pneumonia, and it has never been reviewed or renewed. Ray opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. Nothing came out. He looked like a man standing on a trap door who'd just heard the bolt slide. Linda hadn't sat down. She was still standing at the head of the table, gripping the back of her chair with both hands, knuckles white.
She turned to me.
Her eyes were wild. Not scared, not sorry, furious. You did this. It wasn't a question. You called the cops on your own mother. I looked at my mother across that table full of food and bank statements, 22 people watching, the turkey going cold, the cranberry sauce sitting next to page 14, where $4,500 had disappeared into a roof repair that never happened. I spoke in the same voice I use in courtrooms. Level, clear, no heat. I didn't call the cops. Mom, I am the investigation. The room shifted. I could feel it. A collective intake of breath from 22 people who'd spent 10 years believing I was nothing. My name is Bethany Foster. I'm a senior investigator for the Tennessee Department of Human Services, Adult Protective Services Division. I've held this position for 10 years. In that time, my unit has investigated and resolved 47 cases of elder financial exploitation, recovering over $3 million in stolen assets for victims across East Tennessee. I paused, let the words settle, watched them land on every face at that table. Aunt Patricia's, Uncle Glenn's, the cousins, Pastor Johnson's, every person who'd heard Linda's version of me for a decade. You always said I sat in Knoxville doing Lord knows what. I looked at Linda. Lord finally knows what I do, Mom. Linda exploded. The chair behind her crashed to the floor. You ungrateful. After everything I sacrificed, you come into my mother's house and accuse me. How dare you? She was screaming, hands shaking, face red, spit on her lower lip. Every word louder than the last, filling the dining room, rattling the china. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't step back. I stood exactly where I was and waited. I'd done this before. Stood in the center of someone's rage and let it burn out. It's the first thing they teach you in crisis intervention. The louder they get, the quieter you stay. Power doesn't come from volume. It comes from the person who doesn't need it. Linda ran out of words. She stood there breathing hard, hands balled into fists, tears streaming. I said, "It is her house, Mom. And her money and her choice." Ray made one more attempt. He leaned forward in his chair and said, "Janet, is that your name? Listen, this is a family matter. Helen is my mother-in-law. She asked us to manage things. She signed the papers. This is all a misunderstanding." Janet didn't blink. "Mr. Foster, the power of attorney was executed during a hospitalization for pneumonia. Mrs. Foster's arthritis medication has been unpaid for 3 months. Her property taxes are delinquent. The charges to Allied Medical Solutions, the billing company, listed on 6 checks from the account. That company was dissolved in 2019. It has no active address, no phone number, and no employees. The checks were deposited into a personal account held by Linda Foster." Ray stared at the tablecloth, at the red wine stains spreading slowly into the white linen. He didn't say another word. And then my grandmother stood up. Mrs. Calloway, who'd been sitting beside her, invited by me for exactly this moment, took her elbow and helped her rise. The room turned. Every head, every eye. Grandma Helen stood at the end of that long oak table in her blue church dress, with her bruised hand resting on the edge of the tablecloth. She was trembling, not from weakness, from the effort of holding back 40 years of patience until the right moment. "I taught second grade for 40 years, she said. Her voice was thin but clear, the voice of a woman who'd spent 3 decades commanding a classroom. "I saved every penny I could. I raised my children in this house, and they took everything except my crossword puzzles." She paused, looked at Linda, looked at Ree. That was their mistake. Nobody at that table breathed. Pastor Johnson stared at his napkin. He wasn't laughing now. None of them were. Darren was standing in the doorway between the dining room and the kitchen. He hadn't moved since we walked in. His face had gone through every stage. Shock, denial, confusion, and now it was something worse. Recognition. He looked at me. I could see it in his eyes. He was replaying every conversation, every email I'd sent that he dismissed. Every time I'd tried to tell him something was wrong, and he'd shut me down. "You were trying to tell me," he said. His voice was barely above a whisper. "The email about the property tax. I thought you were just..." He stopped. He couldn't finish the sentence. I said, "I know what you thought, Darren." He pressed his hand against the door frame like he needed it to hold him up. His eyes were red. He was looking at the bank statements on the table, the 26 pages of evidence that proved everything his sister had been trying to say and everything his parents had been hiding. Deputy Morris stepped forward and addressed the room. His voice was measured, practiced. "At this time, Raymond Foster is being asked to accompany me for questioning regarding potential felony elder financial exploitation under Tennessee Code Annotated Section June 17, 71. Linda Foster is being served with a temporary order restricting contact with Helen Foster and access to her financial accounts pending the completion of the APS investigation. Linda was led toward the door. She passed Grandma's chair on the way out. She stopped. Grandma looked up at her daughter, not with anger, not with contempt, with sadness. Quiet, heavy 55-year-old sadness. "I kept your graduation photo on the wall, Linda. 40 years. I was so proud of you." Linda's face crumpled.
She cried.
Not the tears of someone who's sorry, the tears of someone who's caught. "I know the difference. I've seen it 47 times. 3 months after Thanksgiving, Ray Foster accepted a plea deal, felony elder financial exploitation, 18 months of supervised probation, full restitution of $48,000 to be paid over 5 years, a permanent no-contact order with Grandma Helen." His attorney argued financial hardship. The judge pointed out that Mr. Foster had managed to purchase a new truck and a wardrobe of Carhartt jackets while his mother-in-law went without arthritis medication. The hardship argument did not go well. Linda's case went to trial in February. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. Guilty on 2 counts of financial exploitation and 1 count of theft over $10,000. Sentencing is pending. The restraining order remains in effect. Grandma Helen's power of attorney was formally revoked by the Blount County Probate Court. Her accounts were frozen, audited, and restored to her sole control. The balance won't reach $131,000 again. Some of that money is gone for good, but the bleeding stopped. Her property taxes were paid. I covered them myself, and Grandma insisted on paying me back at $12 a month because that's who she is. Her methotrexate prescription was reinstated. A home health nurse visits 3 times a week. Mrs. Calloway comes by every day. Darren was silent for 2 months after Thanksgiving. No calls, no emails, no texts. On a Sunday in late January, an email arrived in my inbox. Subject line, empty body.
"I'm sorry."
I should have listened. I wrote back, "Come have dinner with Grandma on Sunday."
"She misses you."
He came. He brought flowers and a crossword puzzle book from the dollar store. Grandma made him sit in the wicker chair on the porch and wouldn't let him leave until he'd finished the first puzzle. He got stuck on 7 across. She helped him. Sunday morning, April. I drove the 45 minutes from Knoxville to Mville with the windows down. Dogwood trees in bloom along Route 9, the mountains soft and green in the distance. I pulled into the gravel driveway of the farmhouse. The gutters had been replaced. Darren did it himself. 3 weekends in a row. The garden was coming back. Mrs. Calloway had helped Grandma plant new tomato starts and a row of basil along the fence. The herb bed was weeded. The porch steps were swept. On the porch, in the wicker chair, sat Grandma Helen. 88 pounds of patience and crossword puzzles in a blue cardigan. A cup of coffee on the armrest. The Sunday paper open on her lap. I sat down in the chair beside her. She handed me a pencil. We worked in silence for a while, just the scratch of graphite on newsprint and the cardinals calling from the cedar tree. She tapped a clue with her finger. 9 letters. What you build when no one is watching. I smiled. Character, Grandma. She nodded, filled it in. I knew you'd get that one. The people who mock your silence will never understand what you are building inside it. But the ones who need you will always find a way to call. A crossword puzzle. 3 words circled in red. That's all it took to unravel 10 years of lies. If someone you love is being silenced by a spouse, a child, a caretaker, remember, the quiet ones are often the ones fighting the hardest battles you'll never see. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment if you've ever been underestimated and subscribe, because on this channel, silence always finds its voice.